Welcome to the Lost Vet podcast, where we are helping you to get back to your passion and purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Melodie Chan, and in today's episode of Destination People, Rob and I are going to dissect down a group of terms as it relates to transactional analysis. So what we're talking about is communication styles. So hold on to your hats as we try to get you back to adult communication. Have a listen. Are you ready for this one? This session for me was one of the most sort of pivotal mind shifts in how I communicated with my team. And it was this concept of transactional analysis where Rob helped define for me parent type communication, adult type communication, and child like communication. And this really shifted my own mindset in how I was interacting with my team. So, Rob, I am so excited that you get to share this with the audience because I do think it will really reset a lot of managers' mindsets in just how they're maybe interacting with their team members, and even just interpersonal, just colleague to colleague, just how people are speaking to each other. So let's maybe start from the top. How would you give a general overview of what this transactional analysis communication is?
Well, this was it's an Eric Berne model, and it's predominantly used in therapeutic settings. But I've seen it used in negotiation, I've seen it used in selling, I've seen it used in therapy, counseling, all kinds of different areas. And it's become very, very popular as a simple, clear method to explain different modes of communication and what happens when we adapt those modes. It's worth noting that we're just going to kind of take we're just going to touch lightly on the surface, but within each of the parent and the child modes, the ego states, as you would call them, there's actually different elements, there's different ego states. So within parent, there's a nurturing element, there's a critical element. Within child, there's an altered state, there's a free child. So there's different elements which are really worth reading a little bit more, looking at how the model functions in a bit more detail. But for the purpose of today, we're gonna touch on it pretty lightly, but hopefully you'll find the information that we're going to discuss today really super helpful. Because a bit like you, Melody, when I first saw this model, it was super helpful. And again, a bit like we've talked about in another episode around above the line, below the line. This is not something that we can be in complete control of all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
This is like more of a mirror tool that we can hold up to ourselves and also others as well, and see how they're communicating, and then what that impact is potentially having on us, and also how we're communicating and what impact that's having on the other person as well. But at its core, we're looking at three core styles of communication, as you've referenced: parent style, an adult style, and a child style.
Okay. So why don't we break each of those down in styles and maybe situational examples? So, if our goal, let's start with the goal. Our goal is to maintain that line of adult to adult communication. And so what does that mean?
Perfect. So that's a great place to start. And adult communication is the style with there's no ego state attached. There's no breakdown like there is in the other two different styles. Um, the adult state doesn't attach any history or any judgment to communication. So it tends to see things just as they are. So typical hallmarks of adult communication are openness, directness, honesty, compromise, listening, hearing, but also sharing, discussing, debating, respect. There's an awful lot of very positive communication elements or tropes to do with adult communication. And if you think about that in any part of your lives, whether it's in your practice or whether it's in your personal lives, the more often that we stay in that communication style of adult to adult, that's a very productive place to be, because we're not competing on egos, we're not trying to win or get the other person to lose or anything like that. We're just trying to find like the optimum outcome, if you like, from that conversation. And it could be something really basic, or it could be something quite complicated that needs quite a high level of discussion. But that adult, excuse me, adult style communication is really very effective at helping us progress things in a very straightforward way. So the difficulty, of course, is that it's impossible to stay there. So if that was easy, I think the world would be kind of boring, but we would also probably get a lot more done as well. So it's a very challenging state, but also very productive.
So, if you started drifting into the parent style of communication, what does that look like then?
Well, if we think about the way parents naturally communicate with actual children, that's probably a good starting point. So,
Okay.
if we think about uh, being in charge, if we think about telling, if we think about instructing, if we think about guiding, setting standards, enforcement, I mean, there's love in there. Of course, we've got a nurturing element to the parent role, but essentially, it's a person in charge of another person who's junior to them and needs that level of instruction. So, parents are in charge. Parents say things like, go tidy your room. Parents say, be polite, be respectful. Parents say, make sure you finish your vegetables at dinner time. They set a standard, but they also enforce that standard if there isn't compliance with it. So that, as you can imagine, is totally appropriate with children. Like actual children, children need guidelines, they need parameters, they need boundaries, they need some structure. Otherwise, it's chaos. So parent style communication with an actual child, really, really effective. I think where the model starts to come into play is when a parent style of communication is actually being utilized with another adult. Then that moves us into completely different territory. And you could appreciate that if you're an adult and someone starts communicating like a parent would communicate to a child, that can be quite triggering. And that means that we're very likely at that point to shift our style of communication too.
Would it ever be appropriate? Let's say we're in a training phase of developing somebody. I'm harkening back to our discussion of training, mentoring, coaching. Training, we're only there for 10%, but somebody might be just completely new. Is that more parent style of directive communication appropriate in this scenario?
I think it can be in terms of being instructional in some of the information. So, in terms of directing someone to a particular standard. So, if there's a way a machine needs to be operated, or if there's a protocol that needs to be followed, then that's naturally going to lean towards that more directive style of communication. But remember, the goal is adult communication. So, that would immediately snap you back into what way would you like to be taught this information? How would you like to approach this conversation? What way do you learn best? Maybe they learn best by doing instead of being told. So I think if you can always kick off in adult style, then you'll minimize the necessity to move into that more parental and directive style of communication.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because I think again these aren't sort of black and white states that ye shall never move out of this block, but just I think being
Yeah.
aware of just where certain styles can be helpful, but not staying in a space too long. Let's say in that parent's phase of communication where it can become toxic. What does a child style of communication look like then in this scenario?
Well, over the last 12 years, I've been raising a child with my wife, Grace, and I think we've seen all the different styles of communication that a child can bring to the table. Sometimes it's very loving, sometimes very gentle, sometimes it's very liberated, very honest, very open, but also tends to be quite emotional, tends to be a little bit insecure, kind of feel a bit like being a victim. That things you often hear children say will be, "That's not fair. You're blaming me for that. I never get to do what I want. Why can't I do things my own way?" Kind of pushing the boundaries and rebelling against the system, as it were. And it tends to be quite collaborative, but not with the actual parent. They tend to be collaborative with the other parent, perhaps. So maybe, "Oh, Dad, you won't believe what Mum's asked me to do," or "Mum, you won't believe what Dad said to me today," or talking to their friends. "God, this is really unfair. I don't get to do." They might not say anything to you, but that sulky communication might be siloed off into a different friendship or a different relationship. Other family members, granny, granddad, you can imagine. I'm sure many of you experience it too. So, um, children communicate in a wonderfully open, honest kind of way. It's very rare you be questioning what they're thinking. You tend to see quite openly the way they're feeling at any given moment. And again, that's cool. That's fine. That's the way kids communicate. That's a totally appropriate style of communication for a child to adopt. But we're bringing that into this model. We're talking about adults here. So is it appropriate for an adult to communicate in those same ways? Sulky, victim, upset, angry, storming off, leaving, highly emotional, not looking at the situation for what it is, as we try to do in adult style communication. So it's a typical style for a child to use, but of course it's pretty obvious it's pretty ineffective for an adult to utilize that style.
And so, how would you manage a person, let's say in a one on one scenario, if you're managing somebody who tends to stay in that child style of communication, which to me also mirrors being below the line. So, if you haven't listened to that episode, you'll want to go have a listen to understand that term. How would you manage somebody to help bring them to that adult level if their tendency is to just act in that childlike way, whether it's one-on-one or worse in a group setting?
Well, again, let's think about the control element of the question. How do you get? Well, you can't really. Okay, what you can do is you can adapt your style of communication to provide some point of contrast to the others, right? So the way that you would do that is you stay in adult communication, you remain untriggered, as it were. You don't shift your style of communication, you stay exactly as you are, and you seem to be upset at the moment. You seem to be quite angry at the moment. How long do you need? Would you like to take a break? When we come back, we can resume this conversation. How long a break do you need? Like, you just stay calm. You stay in that adult moment, because what then happens is you develop the contrast between their communication style and yours. The temptation, of course, is to move styles too, and that's why I said it was triggering when we talked about the different styles of communication. The temptation is to parent the child, as it were, or to be a child with the parent, the child with the other child, as it were. So, kind of like, this isn't fair. Well, do you think I like doing this as well? Like, it's it's quite easy to get into those dialogues without really a great deal of effort. And I'm sure you can all imagine situations in all parts of your life when that happens, right? And this is why it's such a useful model, because it's one of control and awareness, right? It's like saying, do I know how I'm communicating right now? But more importantly, do I realize the impact I'm having on the other person? One of, I suppose, a typical trope that you see in parent style and child style, and again, very much done this myself, is you behave in a way, and then you blame the other person for the way they're behaving. So they're always telling me what to do, and it's like, you're always communicating like a child. So nobody wins in that kind of communication way. It just ends up being kind of self-destructive. But that in a way actually brings us quite nicely to the usefulness of this model, right? So let's summarize some key points, right? We can all be adult, we can all be parent, we can all be child in the style of communication. That's a given. And we can do that all day long, depending on the situation. And we can do that all day long, depending on how we're feeling. We can do that all day long based on how someone else is addressing us, right? So it's a very variable situation, a state that we're constantly moving through all the time. But also remember that your communication style triggers others, their communication style triggers you. But let's all agree, adult is optimum. And if both of us are in adult style, then we're going to get the most done. And we're going to do it in a way that brings everyone along with you. Now, okay, so far so good. That's all super easy in a way to understand that conceptually. Go, yeah, I can probably do that. They probably see this person doing that. Now, here's the problem. When that communication style becomes persistent with an individual, and let's just say that's between you and I, Mel, and let's say we're both confident people, we both want to have things our own way, and we both end up in a parent-parent dynamic. Right? So every time I talk to you, I'm always telling you what to do. And every time I do that, that triggers the hell out of you, and you want to tell me what to do instead. Okay? Now that's fine if that's just a conversation. But what happens is, if this persists, right? And if the style of communication becomes like the only style that we have available to us, we never get to adult, we never get to any other style, that becomes more than a communication style. For me, that becomes like a role that you're playing. So you become the parent, right? And then you see that, so you become, I'm parenting this child over here, and you assume that role of responsibility. They assume that role of you're being controlling and difficult and challenging, and the difficulty with that is actually that you can have those very, very specific relationships with individuals. So you could have a team of 5 people. You could have adult here, parent child here, child parent there. But like, you can have all of the variables depending on that relationship. So this is not like a catch-all where it's like, oh, I'm always this way with everyone. That happens. But these very, very, they kind of like tracks. They kind of develop specific tracks with the person that you're communicating with. And you recognize, well, you can recognize if you're able to step back from it, that there are just things that they might be saying or doing that you find triggering, but also then consequently reflecting your style of communication too. So that's where you really get into a trouble zone for me. It's not that we can't fluctuate in and out. That is the most normal thing in the world. Be aware, stay adult. If the other person's gone one way or the other, definitely stay adult and see how long it takes them to get back. You can challenge them. Again, that above the line, below the line model is a good conversation starter in that regard. But beware, beware, beware. When those communication styles don't deviate and they're always the same and it's not adult, that for me is the very beginning or the continuation of a toxic relationship. And you would actually probably need to have some mediation to undo some of the damage that your respective communication styles has done over that period of time.
As you're speaking, I don't know if you noticed, I was smiling because as you're talking about these different scenarios, I'm just going through the Rolodex in my head of my career and all the people I've interacted with, and just thinking through, right, those scenarios, because I think like my default, if I'm starting to get stressed or triggered, is to go into parent. And I can really see, sometimes you're thinking you're being helpful to the other person by being more directive. In my case, I just think being in control is better. So that's my default position, because then they can do the thing you want them to do, but realizing, just as you said, and I can see that, how it really doesn't help anybody in the situation. Um, and also those moments where you do just get pulled right down and it's this child to child interaction, and that's not good either. I think, again, I
Validation through the process. It's
oh,
like you're kind of mutually treating one and mutually validating one. Look how
yes.
childish she's being. Look how childish she's being. And we're going, yes, I know. And it's like, yes, we both win
Oh,
and lose at the same time.
it's terrible. It's terrible. Um, I think, again, what I found really, really helpful in understanding this model, there were two things for me personally. One was being aware and conscious of how I was interacting with others. So it allowed me to step back and really evaluate, wow, I spend a lot of time in the parent side of things. Can I step down back into where I need to be as an adult? The second piece for me that was really helpful with this model was having, again, common language. As I think if you're in that situation with people or one person, you can almost diffuse the situation by just saying, "Oh wow, okay, I feel like I'm acting like a child right now," or I think we've regressed into child conversation, or I can feel myself getting triggered and wanting to tell you what to do. Let's take a break because I don't think this is really constructive right now. When should we reconvene? I think it, again,
Yeah.
having that common language, and it almost, again, it allows you to step back and be objective in what's actually happening in the situation, in that conversation, like not even sort of the issue you're dealing with, but allows you to almost reset and find a better way forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think where you have most control is when you're transitioning from one to the other. I think once you're in, then you're in. And it's like something needs to break that cycle a little bit, because once we get like, oh, okay, I'm control, I'm telling, like that can be quite intoxicating. So yeah, I think we've got most power in the transition, but it's just sometimes it just needs to play out, right? It's just like we need to have this conversation. I need to say what I have to say, and then I have to say, I'm sorry for saying what I had to say the way I said it. Let's come back to zero. Let's go back to adult. But yeah, it's hard. It's an impossible standard in many ways, but it's a great awareness tool, that's for sure.
We're always works in progress. So hopefully this can help us on that journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Excellent. Thanks for the chat, Rob.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thanks, Melodie.
This episode was a reminder for me, as always, that communication is always one of the toughest things that we can continually work on, but is always one of the most important things. So we dissected down this idea of transactional analysis, which really is about communication styles. And our objective is to try to be communicating at an adult level of communication, which in my mind is very similar to being above the line. And so what that means is ownership, accountability, responsibility. Adult to adult conversation, though, doesn't mean that you have to be agreeing all the time. Just remember that you can be debating, you can be respectfully challenging each other, but it's having that openness and talking about the thing and maybe just somebody's actions and the impact, but not about blaming the person or pointing fingers. It's really about that trying to solve problems and having an open discussion. So that's always our goal in our communication style, and remembering and being aware of, you can slip into a parent style of communication, which is a lot more controlling, it's telling, it's directive. And again, there may be certain situations where you need to do that quickly, but remembering that you don't want to stay in that state, similar to dropping down into a child state of communication, which is very similar to being below the line, where you're a victim or you're blaming others or you're just making excuses. I don't know if that's ever really a good state to stay in for long, but again, sometimes you just need to be there and vent. But it's really important to remember, as Rob said, not to stay in those modes, because you can quickly just turn into that role. And so thinking about, if you're interacting with someone and you always take on a parent style of communication, that person may always then react and respond as a child, because they know you'll just tell them what to do, or vice versa, where you can just, sort of put your hands up and go, well, I know so-and-so will always tell me what to do, so I'm not even going to try to do anything. Again, remembering the reverse can be true. And don't beat yourself up. This is a really challenging thing to keep your head above water and not be triggered. I know Rob says try not to be triggered. That is always a challenge, to not be triggered by the things that trigger you. But again, I've myself have had my own experiences in realizing situations that I could have handled better in a communication way. And, you've always got another opportunity. So hopefully you'll find these terms helpful in just reflecting on yourselves and sharing with others, so that they can reflect as well on their communication styles. I really hope you found this helpful. Thanks for listening, and until next time.